Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of TLM Open Circle. It's an initiative of the Leprosy Mission Trust India, which is supported by the Rotary Club. As you can imagine from the name Open Circle, it's a very open and inclusive space for having conversations, conversations that can encourage people, a conversation that can inspire people to think differently, think deeply. It is a space for us to listen, to learn, and to discover the power of collecting wisdom. And today we'll do the same thing. We'll listen and learn from a very esteemed colleague, Mr. Parvinder Singh. He is the head of media and communications at the United Nations World Food Programme. But don't go by just his designation. He has donned many hats. He has been a journalist, a researcher, a public policy professional, and I think at this juncture, he is donning all the three hats. So it's a pleasure to invite him to have a conversation with us. Hi, Parvinder. Thank you so much for being on the show. A warm welcome to you. How are you doing?
I'm wonderful, and it's an absolute honor and privilege to be part of this initiative, and look forward to the conversation. And very impressive intro, so thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Parvinder. Parvinder, my first question to begin with is, you have been associated with the domain of nutrition for a couple of years now with the United Nations. Do you think your journey has somewhat shaped your understanding of nutrition and issues pertaining to nutrition in country and across the world?
Yeah, so very, very pertinent question. And I must start by saying that the issue of hunger and food security is a very fundamental one. We live in a world where we produce enough for everyone. The scientific developments, the agricultural revolutions, all the growth that has happened with management of agriculture has put us in a place where the humankind produces enough for everyone. But if you look deeper, we now have hunger at a record level, in the sense that the number of people who are either hungry or food insecure is close to 300 million. And this is rising. In fact, in terms of the targets, the fundamental target that we had on Sustainable Development Goal 2, which is zero hunger, we've not only likely to miss the mark by 2030, the levels of hunger has taken us back to 2014 when the SDGs were created, when the nations adopted them, member states adopted them. So the question of hunger and food security is hidden in plain sight for most people. But my association with hunger and food security is an old one. It started before my current role with United Nations World Food Programme, which is when I started looking at the struggles related to land, struggle related to livelihood, and there's a fundamental link between livelihood, land ownership, agriculture, and food. So I've come to believe, and that's a fact, if you would look at the developmental discourses as well, that without food, there is no peace. WFP got Nobel Peace Prize in 2020. A food humanitarian agency getting a peace prize may seem odd, but it's a validation of the fact that most of the conflicts in the world today are causing hunger or are linked to hunger. People, when they have food insecurity or there is hunger, they either go into crises which result in famine or they go to war. So food is fundamental to peace, and food is also fundamental to development. So when you boil it down to that, you also look at the most marginalized and vulnerable. It's not how many people have access to food, which is a very important indicator. How many are left behind? Who are the people and communities who are bereft of access to food and nutritional security? And nutritional security is even more important. Just having access to some kind of a meal is not food nutritional security, because if you have deficiencies, you cannot function. And if you cannot function, you can't have education. You can't try and build your life. Your health crisis will always be a challenge for you financially and otherwise. But I think we ought to pay more attention, which I started doing as well, to the fact that no one should be hungry. The world needs to ensure food security for everyone, for all the other goals and peace in the world to be there.
Nice, nice. That's very apt. Now, what you said brings me to another point. What I gather is that nutrition, malnutrition, poor nutrition, hunger, these are not linear problems as such, right?
Exactly.
And there are offshoots and there are intersections. But how does UNWFP look at those intersections? It's not only about war or crisis situation. What could be other intersections that you look at?
Sure. Well, that's a very, very important question. So India currently has world's largest food safety net. It caters to about 1 billion people. That's about 70% of our population, which means that there are policies in place which acknowledge National, Food Security Act 2013-14, and the entire infrastructure that has been created. Now, the access to food is variable, which means that the intersectionality you're talking about, which community you belong to, whether you are a woman, whether you're a single woman, whether you're a person with disability, you are a survivor of gender violence, or a person impacted by leprosy. All of these things kind of create subsections within the broader social group which these schemes try to reach to. And the barriers that people face, they're also linked to where they're placed in the society. So the marginalized sections which do not have easy access and their struggles are far more intense, daily wage workers and women and all of that, could be a whole range. They should be part of the food safety nets. And the true purpose of a food safety net is, as Gandhi said, think of the last person in the chain of access that you can. And that's where WFP works very, very closely with the government. So in India at least, we are a humanitarian organization globally, and we are one of the largest humanitarian organizations in the world. In India, our work is a little different. We've been co-travelers with Government of India for last 60 years. And as you know, India used to receive aid, food aid at one point of time. It was dependent on that, and it became a struggle for the country to step out of it. So now we are a food surplus nation. We are also providing humanitarian aid to other countries. But the need is still that we address all the gaps that are there. Now, I'll give you an example of one of the studies that we did, and it relates to disability. So we know for a fact that when you even cursorily look at people standing in the queue to receive their ration or any other social scheme or entitlements, persons with disability are not visible. And we know the invisibility of persons with disability also puts them at a huge disadvantage of not being able to get their citizenship rights and services. So we did a study in Odisha with the Odisha government where we wanted to map out what are the barriers that persons with disability and their families face in accessing social schemes, including nutrition and food safety nets. And the findings were quite revealing of the broader struggle or intersectionality that you talked about, of how a marginalized group, if it doesn't have the right access, or if it is not being engaged through customized, adaptive, context-driven policies and implementation ideas, they will never be able to get even the basic benefits of those schemes. And the study looked at whole of Odisha, and it looked at Odisha's disabled communities through very intensive interviews. We went to villages, communities, also some of the colonies where people impacted by leprosy in Puri who stay, and which was one of the most important part of the study really. And we realized that the access is impeded by four things. One, there is no awareness, limited amount of awareness. And that relates to a person with disability not receiving information. It's the same in the case of gender, that the information reaches the men in the house, it reaches the more kind of visible face of the house. It may not always percolate down to a person with disability. Also, the distribution outlets, they are not accessible, right? Because they rarely get people with disability there. The home distribution of ration has started recently. It started during COVID, but availability of that is also very limited. The third one is persons with disabilities are also not in the conversation when a lot of these things are being designed. Because we must know that an inclusive perspective is not a dominant perspective in that sense, because we respond to representation, ideas, and people who are visible. A person with a disability are not there. So all in all, the survey, which was a deep survey, found that a person with disability lack awareness. They're also struggling with nutrition, in the sense getting the right amount of food, the right kind of food. They're also struggling with access to other schemes and something basic like disability certificates. And the fourth one, which is very important, is that the policy design isn't really taking their needs into account.
So, Parvinta, you spoke about your study in Odisha. I want to know, see, when we talk about persons with disabilities, that's not a very homogeneous entity. Now, if you can take us through, help us understand the population that you spoke to, the demography in terms of socioeconomic status, education level, and all of that. What do you think? What picture emerged from that
I
perspective?
think, unfortunately, it's a very standard picture, as in rest of the country, in Odisha as well. Limited or no education. Most of them depend on livelihood activities which are not very dignified. For instance, the colony where leprosy affected families stay, most of the members are into begging. Puri happens to be a religious place where people go, so they've been doing that for many, many years. In places where persons with disability have managed to get education, and it's a huge struggle in terms of access, they also are struggling to find jobs, the employability part of it. Some of them have become entrepreneurs, and they're exceptional, very hardworking. And a lot of them, I clearly recall one particular gentleman, a young person with disability, married and has 2 children. He was 35 years old. We spoke to him because we also made a film after the survey. And we spoke to him, in the city where he runs a cycle repair shop. He has a battery-driven tricycle. We finished the interview. It was dark. The clouds had just started coming in. It started raining heavily. We were supposed to go to his home to interview his family as well. So he led the way through his tricycle, through all the mud and water and slush. We reached his home. He gave the interview. And while we were going to call it a day, because we had a rather successful day in terms of getting all the viewpoints on camera, this young man just stepped out and he says, "I'm going back to my shop." It was 8:30 in the evening. And he had driven for about 18 kilometers to get us to his home. 18. And I was kind of worried that we might have ended up making things complicated for him for the day. And then I asked him, "Do you still have clients who will come in?" He said, "My shop is open and there are 2 cycles I have to still repair." And he went back. And I met him next day and I asked him, none of the other shops were open. There were a couple of other cycle repair shops. Why did you have to go back? The others may have also had work. And he pointed out the reality that a lot of persons with disability live in, and that's where the context-driven part comes in, that either they have to work 3 or 4 times harder because he has to spend more on everything that he does because things are not accessible, right? And that is the reality of living with disability in a non-accessible policy or infrastructure environment. So I'm just taking this example to highlight to you, even at the basic level, it is a much tougher world. It requires more resources. It requires superhuman kind of efforts at times to be able to do the same thing which a non-disabled person does. And so goes with food and nutrition. And the family scenarios also, because of the social stereotypes, which works also in the case of gender. Women eat last, girls are given food right at the end. And then this has been coded into social system. Persons with disability are also treated in the similar way. And because if there is a shortage of food or there is a priority that family has to put in terms of who gets nutrition first, women, girls, and persons with disability would be deprioritized.
Right. Now, I would come back to the question of accessibility.
Yeah.
Now, on the one hand, you have a list of social protection schemes, be
Right.
it nutrition, be it pension, any other schemes. And on the one hand, you were saying that people are not aware of those schemes,
Yeah.
that information is not reaching them.
Right.
And especially people with disabilities are not able to identify what those schemes are. They don't know what those schemes are. Now, how can they access if they don't know? That's very fundamental.
Yes, that's a big challenge.
But why do you think there's always, it's not just about nutrition, but even I have heard that for other schemes also, that information, even if in terms of disaster preparedness, they are the last person to get information about certain protocols and measures being taken place. Why do you think this is so, and where do you think the problem lies?
Yeah, a very deep question, and it often kind of ends up with a very generic answer, but I'll try and go deeper. The most generic answer to that is that all the response mechanisms, schemes, and their implementation is designed by people who might not have the right understanding of the whole of society, right? The other is that if you have an inaccessibility built into our social thought process, it perpetuates through all systems that you work. Why is it that the most important buildings in the city always have about 25 to 40 stairs to climb, which is difficult for anyone? So somehow inaccessibility in our architecture, in our mindset, in our understanding of power is about inaccessibility. And that tends to perpetuate. The bureaucracy, the planning, all of it came from an era where the colonial rule wanted to show the colonized their place. We ended up perpetuating it. It's difficult to break power structures, especially when there is a lack of knowledge. So we are challenging. The whole society is in different kind of phases working on it. The Person with Disabilities Act and other things, they're all there. So that's one part of it that, it needs to change. For it to change, there needs to be an acknowledgement. What is inaccessible for persons with disabilities, inaccessible for young children, inaccessible for women, people who might have temporary disability, they might have health issues, walking, mobility, sensory, all of it. So accessibility is not taken as a default thought process because you don't think of everything and every user. So that's one fundamental problem. That needs to be addressed, and the process is on, and we need to be on it. The more practical response of how the schemes can be made more inclusive and why they should be made inclusive is that we need to design it in a way. Now, there was a phase that a large part of these schemes were covering most people. And it is relatively, India has reached a level where it is reaching most people. But leaving no one behind is a very important principle that UN follows, which basically means that now you're at a stage where you have to customize it for the context and the need of the user. So if you have an announcement system that is there to tell there is a cyclone which is about to hit, you cannot just have a loudspeaker blaring sirens, which will be inaccessible to a lot of people who cannot hear.
Exactly.
Right? And that might be not just people with disabilities, that could be elderlies who are hard of hearing, who cannot hear because of the age. So these things have to be brought into our system and thought process. And once we start thinking like that, we're also thinking of an inclusive society. We are thinking of society as a whole, whole of society, as we say it. So each scheme needs to be dissected, and that is what we do at WFP. And I think most organizations need to also work on it. Some of them are really trying that. That look at each of the scheme, do the user journey mapping, think of the most kind of who faces most amount of barriers, right, or accessibility challenges, and then design it. Because what is accessible to one individual who is struggling with barriers of knowledge, information, of infrastructure, of access, of opportunity, will work for everyone.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Now, I have a personal bone to pick with policies. You may not agree to that. You see, a person with disability generally doesn't get Manrega job card, And if that person doesn't have a Manrega job card, that person may not be able to apply for PM Awas Yojana or many other schemes. Now, do you think somewhere there are too many exclusion criteria in policies that need to be rethought?
Yes. So here is a very interesting, link between the last question that you asked and this one. So policies essentially are an important instrument of people telling the government of how they want to receive their entitlements, right? The basic guarantees that are there, and that's why the governments are there. The policies don't work, as I said, because perhaps they're not being designed in a way they need to be, the depth they need to go in, the user journey, thinking of the most excluded. But besides that, it is also a technical challenge. It's a challenge of customization. Now, the Manrega job, for instance, most of it is manual. Persons with disability do have access to it, but you're right. Like everywhere else, it is minimal. But when women were working on Manrega jobs, every farm implement, from your generic spade powder to the carrying tasli, the basket that is used, they have been designed for a male's body. The handles are different. And there are organizations that have actually worked, invested, and they include state institutions working on agriculture research. They redesign these for women. And the drudgery of their work has reduced. The output has increased. We need to be able to have that dialogue with people who are close to the community and the community itself, ideally, to be able to inform each of this. And imagine the millions of innovations that will spawn through this conversation. The problem isn't with policy. The problem is how the policy talks to the user, and then it goes back into improving the policy.
Great. I want to take a cue on that and have two strands from there. One is, you said that people with disabilities tend to be invisibilized, right? And on the other hand, we see the policy that gets implemented. It could be nutrition policies, it could be protection, other social protection schemes that generally get implemented at the grassroots. That implementation is done by the foot soldiers like Anganwadi workers or Asha workers and all of them. Now, do you see that in order for those foot soldiers to actually link the vulnerable groups, the wide spectrum? So on the one hand, you have wide spectrum of vulnerable groups. It could be disability, it could be other vulnerabilities. And on the one hand, you have those grassroots soldiers who are actually helping people to link them to those schemes. Do you see there is enough awareness about disability among the grassroots workers that they can actually understand challenges and then link them and help them link to relevant programs and schemes?
Right, very interesting question. So often it is assumed that the community doesn't know the diversity or challenges that are there, right? And most of the Asha, Anganwadi workers, health workers, frontline workers, as we call them, they come from the community. So their awareness levels are very high, actually. They know about what are the pathways of exclusion, including on disability, gender. The schemes that are implemented by them, the training and the aspects of delivery, they might not be as informed. But then the Asha, Anganwadi workers are not in a position to influence that. They are implementing and innovating within their own capacity whatever is possible, but it's not there. So the awareness part needs to be more structured. I think the nutrition work, and we tried this in Haryana with the Haryana government, where WFP has just finished implementing a pilot in which the kind of trainers who go and train Anganwadi workers and the Anganwadi workers who go and train the community, expecting mothers, young mothers, nursing mothers, about nutrition and disability. We structured it in a way that it could be integrated into the existing training. And it has had a big impact because they always knew about it. They were aware of it. They knew about children who need special care. They knew about children who have disabilities. And telling mothers of what is the link between nutrition and health and possibly disability. So once these are converted in a way that they can use, whether we are harnessing technology similar to Asha, Anganwadi apps, there are other apps that have been developed. The trainings, investment in trainings is very important. And these are all then they get another language, more confidence to go and talk about it. It leverages public investment because it gets more focused in terms of how the access is refined. So it's very important, and I think the awareness part is fundamental to the way our implementation on the grassroots works for all the schemes. I often say that social policies become social processes because we have frontline workers, and hence the frontline workers are your ears and eyes on the ground, but also they are the ones who you should invest most in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Now, if you think of priorities, that what would be our priorities in the say next decade or so? What you were saying, that we have already regressed when it comes to hunger and food insecurity. We have kind of regressed
Yeah.
in the last couple of years. Now, if you have to double up our efforts and if you have to make progress towards attaining at least some semblance of nutritional security,
Right.
where do you think we should begin with?
Yeah, that's there's no silver bullet, unfortunately, because the record kind of figures of hunger are a result of three very important factors and many more, but three primarily. One is conflict. We have 40 countries in conflict right now, and they're all food insecure because conflict cuts away the market operations, the supply chain, and people's livelihood. So the 40 countries were dependent on hunger. There is not enough money to do operations of humanitarian nature. So that's one. Conflict is a big driver. The conflicts must stop. Our political systems, global systems must create a long-term solution. A country at war in conflict will have none of its social safety schemes working. So we can't close our eyes to it. Gaza being a very, very clear example. So we can't just sleep over conflicts in big parts of the world. It is not just people suffering, it's also global peace at stake. The second one is that there is a debasement of economic security in a lot of countries. Debt, economic systems collapsing. And there is a phrase called social contract, which essentially means social policy, public policies. The social contract that created liberal state, all the schemes and humanitarian ideas, that is under attack today. And you can see, I'm referring to how nations are building walls of tariff, the oligarchs are deciding what policies must be.
Yes.
So that social contract collapsing is a threat for a huge part of the population. And you're seeing country after country where this has happened, young people are just changing the government without even very clear idea of what the next move should be. We've had it in our neighboring countries already. So the third one is climate change. Now, climate change is essentially a result of a lot of people who face the impact of climate change not being part of the conversation. The solutions have always been there. The intent, the funding could have been organized. But climate change makes people who are already vulnerable even more vulnerable. And yet they're not the ones whose voices are heard. So mitigating climate change, building resilient food systems is another very important one. So these three are broader factors. But to be honest, India set up a huge example in terms of what a social policy-driven state can be. And that is an example for a lot of country transitional economies to follow. Nepal enacted a policy very similar to National Food Security Act, taking cue from India. There are many other countries who are doing TPDS kind of experiments. So that needs to continue. There needs to be an alliance of countries in the world which have gone through this journey of struggle of development and are using state contract or state policies as a very important instrument, because that is what is going to ensure that everybody has, in theory, equality.
Right, right. Parvinder, I see a clear dichotomy in the sense, on the one hand, you're saying that nutrition, disability, nutrition, ill health are clearly linked. And on the one hand, when there is economic crisis, war, and other social crisis, nutrition becomes an afterthought.
Yes.
Right. Now, how do common people, an individual like me or a community at large, how can they contribute? How can they start thinking about at least striking a balance between the two so that it does not become an afterthought, knowing fully well that what could be the ramifications?
Very, very important question. I think one of the biggest crises of our time is attention. the way our attention and our focus is channelized. So our attention has become a commodity. What outrages people, what they spend their time on, they're no longer in control of. So it could be the social media channels, it could be the WhatsApp messages beyond a point. So what I'm saying is that these burning issues are there, yet we often struggle to get focus on them. And the primary reason for that is the attention of people and the accompanying moral compass of responsibility is now a bit challenged, to a large extent. What used to be a concern or an outrage is no longer of that kind. Right? There is much muted response, often neglect. You just swipe up, and it's no longer in front of your eyes. But the reason why people should be concerned about it is that the feeling that hunger is somebody else's issue, food security is not an issue around us, is a slightly kind of ill-informed opinion, because as I said, the whole world got together, the member states of United Nations, and created SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. So when large parts of the world are still hungry and the hunger has gone back to that level, the conflicts are increasing, there is no way for us to peacefully sleep over the idea that since I have food security, I know where my next meal is going to come from. Nobody else has to think about it, because the problem would be at your doorstep next. And you're responsible of thinking about how that can be channelized. As I said, the world produces enough for everyone and more, but people are going hungry, right? So if you ask a child, they'll say simple problem, right? I mean, you have everything, you get it across to people. But such a simple thing would become far more complicated when you look at how that is regulated, that is saying the supply chain disruption that climate change is causing, the wars are causing, the economic disruption, the food price rise, the basket of hunger, to be honest, and everybody who today thinks that access to food is a given should also know how during COVID and in 2008 and possibly in the following decade, how food became inaccessible over a period of time. The envelope of poverty for a large population is very variable. The conflicts and the crises and the economic downturns can really expand it. So we should be concerned at a humanitarian level. We should be concerned as citizens. We should also be concerned as people who can potentially play a role. And in our ways of work, the policymakers we choose, the policies we endorse, the conversations we have, right? And sadly, the conversation around hunger is not visible, because it's very insecure for today's sensibility to talk about hunger at a time when everybody wants to see what is their next big kind of financial goal that they can get to. It questions the luxury and the opulence that we celebrate today. If you have conversations on your dining table about hunger somewhere else, well, you're likely to have the food wasted, about 40% of what's on the table going in the dustbin or a landfill. It's very difficult for you to have a conversation about somebody not having food.
So what I gather from your insights, Parvinder, is that what climate change was 10 years ago, that it was somebody else's problem, 10,000 miles away, the ice is melting and polar bear is getting extinct, but it is not happening in my backyard. Similarly, even if I am a food basket of the world, I am not nutritionally unsecure, I still have to think of it in terms of future. And there is no way that we can invisibilize the discourse on hunger and nutrition. And simultaneously, as citizens, we need to ensure that we impress upon our policymakers to involve the vulnerable groups, the ones who are at the highest levels of vulnerability, to involve them in whatever policies they're making.
So, very important point, Shubhajit. I think there is a terminology that you're hearing a lot in Indian policy circles and discussions in the parliament called Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, one world, one family. It's incidentally also a word which was used in UN many decades back to define how we should look at our collective responsibility and collective future. it's important for people to and citizens to be concerned about things at a humanitarian level as a global citizen, but also that if even if they were thinking from the point of view of self-interest, that this insular notion of what is happening, for instance, climate change, will not impact. It'll have a variable impact, but it'll have an impact at a time and in a way that you may not be prepared for. And you never know of all the conflicts that are there. And you can already see systems collapsing, you already see a lot of people suffering, that your self-interest would also be served by that. So at the level of principle, you should be concerned about everything that's important. The citizenship, the most excluded and marginalized, the collective goals that we've committed to. And we should talk about it at all forums. And we should also create a shift in our mind that our existence is not insular. Right? Amitabh Ghosh has a wonderful book called The Great Derangement, which is basically based on the idea that we have convinced ourselves so strongly in a scientific way of predictability of the safety that we have about everything and everything, including access, that we are losing ability to look at the world as a very dynamic, very uncertain space as well. And it's time we started looking at that.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing that out.
It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us, Parvinder. I think what I'm taking back home is the fact that we can't be insular. No problem that seems distant to us is actually distant. So we need to put our act together and set the ball in action. So thank you everyone, all the audience who watched us in this episode. And I hope that we bring many such conversations to you at the Open Circle. It's an inclusive space where we keep having these conversations that will try to motivate you, encourage you to think differently. Thank you so much.